Hey there, I'm Krista Vance, entrepreneur and operations leader.
And I'm Matt Vance, award-winning author and social innovation researcher. We're your hosts of the Culture Profit Podcast.
Your place for purposeful company culture strategy.
Learn from HR pros, executives, and thought leaders how to prioritize profits by prioritizing people.
This episode is sponsored by Mobrium, the best friend of forward-thinking HR leaders, helping you strengthen your employer reputation as a reflection of your real culture.
Learn more at mobrium.com.
Welcome everyone, and thanks for being with us.
Today, we're leveling up our plane of thought. In fact, we're going a few latitudes north to visit with Russel Lolacher, who's joining us from British Columbia, Canada. Thanks for joining us, Russel.
Thrilled to be here, Matt and Krista.
Russel Lolacher is an international speaker and advocate for meaningful work relationships. He is the creator and host of Relationships at Work, the leadership guide to creating a workplace we love, a podcast and YouTube show where he talks with global experts on how to create healthy organizations. He's held talks with he's held successful leadership and communication roles for almost 30 years, retaining one team for almost 12 years. His work and expertise in building employee and customer trust has been recognized on international stages in Forbes, by Microsoft, Hootsuite, and as a 4-time named top thought leader by the International Customer Management Institute. So where did you get started with the Relationships at Work show?
Oh, well, the origin story. Well, as that very onerous bio of mine, I really need to trim that down. Thank you so much for that. I was in the customer service space for a long time. It was my why is very much I hate people being treated badly. It's just been this like anger trigger and this thing for me for years, and it got me into the customer service space. I also have worked in the service industry and so forth for a long time, so it felt natural to do. Anyway, I'm at a conference speaking in San Francisco, and really good conference, very focused on the customer service experience, no different, usual players, that sort of thing. And then I started asking questions about employees, and the glazed look on people's eyes, this is 2018, and just this, oh, right, employees. Like, it was just this thing that they couldn't even wrap their brain around because they were so focused on customer equals money, not anything beyond that. So to prioritize employees was just sort of an afterthought for these customer service experience leaders. Also, the people attending the conference seemed to not really give a crap about their own employees. They're about just the 1 equals 2, about the money, which is important. But who makes that money for you? So that was such a motivator and a pivot for me. I still very much love the customer experience in that, but I felt like there needed to be more conversation and platforms around those that we work with every day as leaders, that want to be leaders, that don't want to be leaders. And I felt that needed to be a conversation that really needed a little bit more prominence. So I wanted to contribute to that discourse. So that's kind of where it started.
I like that. I think that's super important, and honestly pretty crazy that even in 2018 that was the experience you had of like, wait, what? I mean, yeah, it's really, you have people doing that operation of taking care of the customers. And there was one study that I saw, the UK group, they found that as employees are taken care of better, it obviously ripples over to how the customers are treated, right? It increases those customer satisfaction scores. And it's, kind of a no-brainer that there's a connection there. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, because who takes care of your customers, right? It's your employees.
And it almost felt like the pandemic woke everybody up. It was like, oh, wait, they can leave? They can quit. Like, that was just, it seemed to be mind-blowing for so many leaders that employees had needs and wants and needed to know that values meant something beyond a poster that was in their HR department. Like, it was just, they needed a lot more for them to feel valued at work, and they were willing to demand it. And I think a lot of organizations finally woke up to that.
Yeah, I think they needed the huge challenge that really shook a lot of people to kind of wake everybody up. So, okay, cool. So we also hear you're starting another podcast, and we'd love to hear about that and what that's about.
Sure. Movie nerds. So well, so my baby is relationships at work. It is what I do. It's my passion. But there is this part of me, I won't lie. I'm a bit of a movie nerd. I started a community locally during the pandemic that is quite grown with a co-host of mine, and we've decided to sort of scratch that itch. I mean, I'm the guy that used to ask what were the trailers after watching a movie in the theater, or finishing a restaurant job at 1 o'clock in the morning and going to the 24-hour video store. Yes, to those listening, there was a thing called video stores where I would pick a couple of movies and watch till 3 o'clock in the morning because I was still vibrating. I would go to other countries when traveling to look for movie theaters that would be a different experience than back home. So all that fuel, all that passion of being a movie nerd has got me wanting to start another podcast because the world needs another movie podcast. But it's very much for me and my co-host because it's sort of a labor of love. And if we can build a community locally, it's not for everybody. It's for Victoria, BC, which is where I'm located, and very much digging into our love of themes around genres, particular actors, the span of their careers. So because I'm busy, I'm letting him do all the production, but I will watch the movies and I will talk about them. But I'm letting him do all the heavy lifting because relationships at work keeps me pretty busy.
Everyone does need a movie podcast when it's from you. You've got the
Thank
passion
you.
behind it.
Thank you.
So did you find there was a huge difference experiencing movie theaters in different countries?
It depends. Like, it's really weird and exciting. So, I mean, from everything from timing is a big part of it. So I happened to be in London when the 50th anniversary of James Bond Skyfall came out. So to see a movie that is so revered locally with this sort of cultural hero of the whole country on the opening weekend in that country, there was the movie itself was all set in London as well. So it was really, really exciting to see it with that sort of energy. But then it also flipped. I was in Australia and I went to this movie theater that had been a slaughterhouse, had actually been a slaughterhouse for animals, and they changed it into a vegan restaurant.
Oh,
This is in
wow.
Byron Bay. And they set up this movie theater downstairs called the Piggery, and that it had pillows and comfy couches. It was not a normal movie theater, but it was such an interesting vibe to watch a movie in. So yeah, it's just if you search these out, there are experiences to have.
Holy cow. Yeah, that is highly unique. I mean, the stage was set in both of those settings in a very unique way. I think that's really cool. Well, we're so excited that you're here. Let's jump into some of the meat of the conversation. No pun intended there. But so your podcast, your show, Russell, is really driving home that there's a human connection to be made at work between the leaders and the team members, and even across from the peer relationship. I think there's a lot of different dynamics or directional relationships that happen at work. So let's talk a little bit more about how this connection impacts company culture and how that ripples to profits as well. So from your perspective, how does company culture drive greater profits?
I would say, for me, in my experience, I understand the drive for profits to keep an organization going, but how about saving money? How about saving money around onboarding, hiring, retraining, stress leaves? And that's where a culture can be created that pushes belonging and human centricity. It's about keeping employees, employee retention. This is not a it's not a magazine subscription where you care more about getting new subscribers than keeping the ones you have. That's what an organization needs to do, is understand the human element of the organization they work in. And if an organization focuses on its culture, now a lot of organizations don't get this, and I've talked to a lot of leaders, they don't get that they already have a culture. Whether it's good or bad, it already exists whether they have any influence over it or not. It is happening. And I've talked to so many leaders who are like, well, we need to focus on culture. I'm like, do you know the one you already have? Because it might be very much going on without you. Or we talk about this culture like it's this huge nebulous thing in an organization, when really there's like 7,500 subcultures that are happening within an organization that completely get ignored because the people at the top just think of this singularity culture that doesn't actually exist. It's really all these little cultures that are either trying to defend themselves against a horrible culture, so they build themselves a good culture because it's a group of 5, or it's 2 people that are going out and having a drink after work that are creating their own relationships at work. Good plug. That are building their own relationships that help their own productivity, that help their own understanding of each other, that don't really care that there's these value statements on the wall. So if you're looking at culture, and I kind of break it down into 3 areas. I break it down into, I'm very cute here. Air, land, and sea. So as a leader, if you want to focus on culture, first look at from the air. So from the air, I mean from the highest point. First, understanding what are the influences on the culture that you have no control over. Like really pull back. I remember doing a presentation and I listed every influence that their employees might be having right now: pandemic, housing costs, family issues. We don't become different people once we leave the workplace. We are completely influenced and conjoined by it. So as a leader who's influencing or not influencing their culture, they first need to step back and go, what environment are employees even in? What's the culture that we're even trying to create within? And I don't think that is understood, because that's where compassion and empathy and awareness need to start, is that higher level, before we can even dig into the next level, which is land, which is what you can control and influence. And this is situational awareness. This is understanding that what you do has impact and what matters. I'll give a quick example. Open door policies. We hear about this word, but the least important thing about an open door policy is the door. People don't seem to understand that it is not a physical door. It is the psychological safety that people need to have to get into that room. And as a leader, we need to understand that that's a thing, that matters, that we're not just getting the same 2 people that come visit us every day because 98% of the workforce hates you. And only 2 of them, who you directly influence and pay, feel bold enough to walk in your room. So it's that situational awareness, I think, that really is a superpower that I believe. And last but not least, C, which is looking inside yourself. It's really cute. I know it's that the C level, which is going deeper. That's where the self-awareness is. That's where the accountability is. That's where the self-care is. Because it's like that, that metaphor of in an airplane going down, you have to help yourself before you can help anybody else. And too many leaders are so quick to wanting to fix problems and create that sense of belonging when they're broken themselves. Leaders need leaders. Leaders need to be motivated. Leaders need to feel like they're being supported and belong. They're not just executives that are tools to create culture. They are part of the culture, and they also need to be healthy as well. So if we don't help ourselves first, we're not good to anybody. So I think to influence culture, you need to look at all 3 levels and look at it from a holistic standpoint.
I love that. And I love the way that you've organized that train of thought at those 3 different levels of having awareness, both of this environment around, also that situational awareness, and then that self-awareness. I think those 3 levels are huge. Now, one of the favorite trainings that I've ever done was all about emotional intelligence. It was called Blue EQ. You go through this self-assessment, and essentially you're looking inside. I think it's that C level of seeing how you behave in certain situations, and are you aware of how you're making others feel when you behave a certain way. I think that drawing that baseline in the sand is where it starts, right at the edge of the sea. You got to draw that line there. I also think that data is a huge thing for leaders as you're thinking about understanding all these different variables that is happening within the organization. Like you mentioned, subcultures, for example. As the size of an organization gets larger, the management of the culture and existence of the culture itself becomes increasingly more complex. And so having good understanding, good tools to have data to measure that is important. When I've helped companies through a company culture transformation, it always starts with a baseline survey, and it's typically a more in-depth, longer form engagement survey where you've got lots of multiple choice questions that are going through all of the different kind of key areas of company culture, from leadership to teamwork. Psychological safety is huge. And then you've got those open form comments as well, right? Like, the way that I've liked to set it up is, what is the one thing that's going really well, and what's the one thing that should change, like top of mind, both on positive and negative. And as we've sifted through those comments and found the themes, I found that those answers highlight the trending top positive and negative experience drivers that the company both needs to protect on the positive side and address on the negative. And of course, it's an iterative thing, but I love how you've brought up those three areas of awareness and how they connect directly to profitability. So thanks for sharing that, Russell.
You mentioned also that leaders, maybe they're broken themselves, and that's certainly possible. But what we've seen as we've interviewed and talked to people, and from the research that we've done, is that leaders really have the most ability to affect culture more than others oftentimes do. And so I think, whether they're broken or not, having that self-awareness to be purposeful about how they're treating others and what culture that they are creating really impacts these workplaces and the culture that exists.
And I would say a good culture will take that data and take that knowledge and understand it. A great leader will do something about it. Like,
Right.
doing a survey is a checkbox. Great. You check. You did a survey. It's actually taking that data and actioning it, understanding it from a storytelling standpoint, what that says. That's what makes a great leader. And that's a step that needs to be taken more often.
Love that.
Definitely agree. So with your expertise, tell us a little bit about the employee journey and why it's important for organizations to understand it.
I think the biggest challenge, so employee journey, I will define as what people say about, sorry, I'm moving ahead. The employee journey it's the path an employee takes from beginning to end in every touch point in an organization. Now, there's a lot of argument as to where the beginning of that and the end of that is. The beginning of that can be everything from when they go to your website to apply for your organization. That could be when the employee journey ends. And a lot of people think the end of the employee journey is when they exit the organization. Not true. Moving to a next organization is still part of that employee's journey. It's not the company journey, it's the employee journey. So if a person leaves an organization and goes somewhere else, they can actually still be engaged with their former organization. They could be a boomerang employee where they leave and come back. So an employee journey is literally your career, regardless of where you work. And I think organizations really need to understand that this is a holistic conversation. So I'll look at it from a leadership organization standpoint. What a lot of organizations do is they focus, if at all, on the onboarding process, right? It's all about, here are the promises, here's what's going to happen in the organization. And then they fail them because they don't follow up after that. It's just about the onboarding. And then they forget about them and then maybe do an exit interview afterwards. I think the most successful organization, if they're looking at the employee journey, it's a holistic conversation, i.e., what is that experience in the hiring process, including the interviewing process, including onboarding, and then stay interviews, which I hate that term immensely. Stay interviews are, will you stay? Not thrive, not grow. It's, will you be a bum in a seat? So I'm a bigger fan of thrive interviews and then exit interviews. But what is also missed is looking at those interviews to build off each other. So in the onboarding conversation, do we move to a thrive or stay interview that builds off the questions you asked when you first got hired and then gets reinforced quarterly or not yearly? God, please do not wait that long. Quarterly or regular pulse interviews. And then when you do an exit interview, did you fill all the promises you made at the onboarding process as they leave and walk out the door? An employee journey has to be looked at as wholesome, as opposed to, like I said earlier, a checked box. We onboarded, great. Let's ignore them for the next 30 years. That just can't happen. And unfortunately, sometimes it does.
Very important. I think those additional layers of communication and coming from different, touch points as well, like from the corporate level of having those surveys that are happening on an ongoing basis, but those interviews, like you're saying, I love that repositioning from stay interview to thrive interview. Just the name of it is communicating something completely different. But for me, I've often seen that those one-on-ones with the direct team leader to the team member is one of the key drivers of engagement, because that's the leader that has the most face time with that team member, and them having that ongoing conversation on a regular cadence. Like, of course, like you said, yearly for those touch points is horrible, but I've seen monthly is an awesome cadence. I don't know what you've seen, but maybe just kind of following up on thoughts around that and frequency.
So I'm a big fan of the regular check-in. So I had a check-in with my team, the one that had been with me for 12 years. We had a half-hour meeting regularly that it was completely their time. I didn't dictate it. It was completely what they wanted to do. And usually it went around professional development, blockers that were happening in their careers, something that they were working on relationship-wise that they needed some guidance around. But I only created the space. They were the ones that fed it. I would even try to cancel them, and they were like, no, this was something they looked forward to. Don't get me wrong, we were continuously talking and checking in with each other. This was sort of like an other conversation that allowed for more freedom, that wasn't operational. It was much more thoughtful. It was much more personal. They could even sit there and talk about their personal lives and some of the things that we're going through, which was amazing for me. It got me to know them better. And it also showed me that there was some psychological safety enough for me that they could be that honest. And that's where I think leaders need to really step up around the situational awareness and psychological safety and self and situational awareness. Reason being is, just because you have a check-in doesn't mean it's a good thing. Because if your employee doesn't like you or thinks you're a bad leader, they are dreading that one-on-one every month, every week, whenever it is. If there is not psychological safety or they don't have any respect for you as a leader, then that is the worst part of their experience in their employee journey, is that one-on-one interview, because it feels like a punishment, not a productive time. So don't just assume your employees want a one-on-one. Make sure it's valuable to them, even more so than you as a leader.
So maybe not focusing so much on frequency, although we definitely want to exceed the once a year, and maybe monthly is a good cadence, but focusing on the quality of that meeting. And obviously you can't just suddenly be an awesome leader at that meeting too. Like, it has to be all the time that they respect and value that relationship, so that when you do have those meetings, they can be quality.
And I would add personalization too, because I agree, you can't go, so there's really an easy way of saying there's too many meetings or there's too few meetings. We don't know what the sweet spot is. And that's where getting to know your employees and culture is more important. Some people will want to meet every week. Some don't even want to look at you for 3 months. But figure out what works best for you in that relationship. Just don't cookie cutter it, because that's not leadership. That's management. That
makes a lot of sense, and I like that distinguishment.
Customization, yeah.
So I don't know if you've come across this, Russell, but let's say you have a leader who they've received feedback, maybe it's anonymous or not, and now there's awareness that there's damaged relationships between them and the people they lead. Maybe there's lack of trust, lack of respect. Maybe they haven't done things that they promised to do, and so there's this kind of tension between them and their team. What would you recommend to that leader? How do they go about improving that relationship?
I think first off, they need to want to improve first, because there'll be a lot of leaders that will get that feedback, that negative feedback, and go, oh, that's just a blip, or that's just one person's opinion. Like, they'll dismiss it, or they won't really listen to it, not realizing that most people that have problems don't say anything. So if you're hearing one, it's probably a canary in a coal mine of a bigger issue. What I hope in that organization is that that problem leader intentional or not intentional in their bad leadership, their boss is holding them accountable. Leaders need leaders. Bad leaders need good leaders. So I'm hoping it's a culture of support and professional development and leadership development, because unfortunately, most leaders in leadership roles are not trained at all in how to be leaders. They fixed somebody's problem once, or they were really helpful on a thing. That is not leadership. That is project management. That is, you fixed a problem. Doesn't equal leadership. Doesn't equal I can handle humans. I can be a leader in a situation. So we're asking a lot of these people in these roles. So I have a huge amount of compassion and empathy for those people that are bad leaders when they have never been actually shown what a good leader looks like, and their boss is in the same situation. So I think for someone to be in that situation, they need to first take it seriously, because no matter what, if you're a good leader, you have some influence. Even if you don't agree with it, assume there's some kernel of truth. And what can you do about it? Professional development, asking for regular feedback, going to your boss and going, can we check in every month and follow up on things that I think I need to be doing? Going to your team and asking, how can I better serve you? What can I do to make your work better? How can I remove disengagement issues for you? I think it's very much that embrace the self-awareness and that self-care and that accountability, and be humble and see what you can do about fixing the problem, because the whole culture will benefit from it.
Love that.
Matt's favorite quote from Lee Atwater is perception is reality. So if an employee perceives a leader a certain way, that is the reality of their situation. So the leader needs to take that seriously and use communication to resolve it, for sure.
So just kind of a final question here for you, Russell. There's obviously a lot of directional relationships that we've talked about. The leader to their leader, the leader to their team. How does communication affect relationships in the workplace?
It's everything. It is everything. I can't tell you how many issues, good or bad, in an organization, and if you follow the thread to where the issue started, it was good or bad communication. It's almost always the way it happens, because it's either what's said and not said, it's either actions or inactions and what those actions communicate, it's the words or the words you don't use, it's how you show up, whether you turn your camera on or off, what does that communicate when you're in remote work? There is communication is so embedded into the DNA of an organization that demonstrate what culture and leadership really is. So whether you're communicating as a leader and you only talk up and you never talk to your employees about what's really going on, there's a huge problem. You're breaking your culture because you're managing up, not managing down. You're prioritizing one relationship over the other. What does that communicate in those actions and those decisions? So I think it's really important that, and I worry because a lot of executives, a lot of leaders, a lot of managers think they're good at communications because they've been talking since they were 3, which just breaks my heart, because I'm like, this is a discipline. You go to school for communications and so forth. So I think people need to assume they're bad at communications, even if they're good at it, and regularly do what they can to improve it. Maybe it's, if you write an email, send it to somebody you trust and go, how's my tone? What am I missing here? Do I look like a jerk, or am I actually being empathetic? You don't know when you're too close to it when you're communicating. So I think having a safe relationship network around you that can call you out, that can support you, that can help you better communicate, I think is a secret weapon that more leaders, I think, could embrace.
I love that. Honestly, everything you do or don't do is communicating something. There's always a byproduct message that's connected to your behaviors. And I think having consistency in frequency of communicating is huge as well. Like just how you were saying, like if you have a leader that's prioritizing only communicating upwards to their superiors, that obviously is sending a message to the people that they manage. One thing that I've tried to do personally, and I'm not perfect at it, but communicate so clearly that it's impossible to misunderstand. So minimizing the chance of misinterpretation, both in written communication, verbal communication, even those, nonverbal cues, the way that you hold yourself in a meeting, your facial expression, all of those things. And I think going right back to the very beginning of the conversation, awareness can drive huge amounts of positive change. Like there was one time I was speaking at a conference, and the presentation right before me was all about body language and the communications that are made through body language, especially in a professional setting and in the workplace. And of course, I was still kind of early on in the public speaking, and I was up next. So now I'm like hyper aware of all of these, hand gestures and facial expressions right before I go on stage. So I was that much more nervous. But I think you're totally right that we have to be aware of what we're doing. And sometimes that takes asking someone else that we trust or respect to just say, tell it to me straight. Where am I messing up? And what do you recommend that I start working on?
Communication is always two-way. It's not only what you want to say, but what they hear. Communication is not about you. It's about the audience. You have to put that into a factor as well. So yeah, couldn't agree more.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being here with us, Russell. Thanks everyone for joining this episode. Until next time, we'll see you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Culture Profit podcast and for being a part of our journey to prove that putting people first is best for business.
Today's episode was sponsored by Mobrium.
Want to get more employee reviews and streamline your employer reputation? Visit mobrium.com.
Now go find one way to prioritize your people and watch your profits grow.